Summary of key concepts. We're finishing up the organic chemistry unit today, and we're going to talk about the 4 different macromolecules and summarize what you need to know about each of them. There are 4 macromolecules. There are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And so for each of these, we're going to look at the function, the monomer in each, and examples of each. You also should know the elements in each type. So for carbohydrates, the function is dietary energy. So that's what happens when you eat starch or like potatoes or pasta. That's energy for you. Also plant structure. So cellulose is the way that plants have structure. So that's part of their cell wall. Chitin is another one. So that's not in plants though. That's a structural carbohydrate that's found in certain animals like crustaceans and insects. And it's also found in fungi cell walls. The monomer would be the monosaccharide, so it's nice because they both start with the same thing. Mono means one. So monomer is the general term. Each of the macromolecules has a monomer that you can talk about. The monomer for carbohydrates is the monosaccharide. For examples, you should know that an example of a monosaccharide is glucose. So that's one we're going to talk about over and over again because diabetics have to regulate their blood glucose level. In fact, we've already talked about that when we did the homeostasis unit. We said that when blood glucose levels go up, your body releases insulin, which brings the blood glucose levels down. And when blood glucose levels get too low, your body releases another hormone, glucagon, and that brings the blood glucose level back up. So that's homeostasis, keeping that blood glucose level at a certain stable level. You don't need to memorize the disaccharides, but you should know that a disaccharide is 2 monosaccharides put together. For polysaccharides, there are actually 4 of them that I want you to know. So there's starch, which is the way that plants store energy. And then there's cellulose, which is the way that plants have structure. And then there's glycogen, which is the way that animals store energy for carbohydrates. And then the last example that I want you to know is chitin. And so this is not for plants, but it is structural. So this is fungi cell walls, for example, are made out of chitin. And crustaceans have their cell walls made out of chitin as well. Lipids are kind of a funny group. Oh, actually, let me go back to carbohydrates for a minute. You should also know the elements in carbohydrates. So this is the easiest one. Carbo means carbon, and hydrate you can think of as water. So the elements in carbohydrates are C and then water, H2O. So carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and they're in this ratio. Remember that lipids have the same elements, but they're not in the same ratio. So carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but really only a little bit of oxygen. So the function of lipids, this is stuff like fats. So their function is long-term energy storage. So if you eat way too many carbohydrates, your body can convert it to fat, and you'll store that under your skin, for example. Another example of a lipid is hormones. So there are hormones that are proteins, but the hormones that are lipids are steroids. So examples of steroid hormones are estrogen and testosterone and aldosterone. There are also waxes that you need to know a little bit about. Okay, the monomers. The monomers of lipids are, I'm going to say glycerol and fatty acids. If it's a triglyceride, which is a fat molecule, you're going to have 3 fatty acids. That's the tri part with glycerol. If it's a phospholipid, which is another type of lipid, you're going to have 2 fatty acids with a phosphate group with the glycerol. If it's a steroid, it will have a really totally different structure, and it necessarily doesn't have these. It'll have this kind of ring structure, and it may or may not have a fatty acid sticking off of it. So the reason with the others, like with carbohydrates, you always have monosaccharides for the monomers. With lipids, not all of them have the same monomer, and that's because lipid is just a group that is everything that's hydrophobic. So anything that does not mix with water is going to be called a lipid. So examples are fats, oils, and steroids. You could put waxes as another example here. Proteins. The function of proteins, some are enzymes, and so enzymes we'll spend a whole unit on, and those are the molecules that speed up chemical reactions. So you have a million reactions that happen in your body all the time, and each one has an enzyme that says, hey, this is the way you go, and it helps it to move faster, and so we'll do a whole unit on that. Structure, so collagen, for example, is an example of a protein that gives your body structure. Collagen's the most common or the most abundant protein in your body, and that's the stuff that if you think of someone injecting collagen into their lips, that gives them fuller lips. But collagen's found naturally in your body. It's found under the skin, as part of the skin. It's found all over the place. It's found in your bones to make your bones strong. It's found in your tendons and your ligaments. It's a very strong structure. Proteins also are for storage of energy. So, for example, peanuts, plants will store energy for their seeds in protein. Muscle contraction happens because of the proteins actin and myosin. For transport, you can think of hemoglobin. That's a protein that's in your red blood cells that transports oxygen. So there are a million different functions here. Another would be hormones, and I'm going to write this in because we had talked about hormones with the lipids. And so some hormones are lipids and some hormones are proteins. So I want to make sure you have that down. So you should add this in. The monomer of proteins are amino acids. And if you look at the elements here, we've got carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, just like we had with the others, with the carbs and the lipids, CHO. But we also have this amino group, and so there's a nitrogen here. And there are some amino acids where the side group has sulfur in it, so we're going to add sulfur into that. Not all proteins have sulfur in them, but many do. An example of a protein would be lactase. Lactose is a sugar and it's not a protein, but lactase is an enzyme. So anything that ends in ASE is an enzyme, and we'll talk about that in a couple of units from now. Hemoglobin is a protein that transports oxygen. It's in your red blood cells, and so that's just one more type of protein. The last macromolecule would be a nucleic acid, and so one example is information storage. So that's what DNA does. There, you could also put in energy because the molecule ATP is your quickest energy source. The monomer of a nucleic acid is a nucleotide, and the nucleotide has three parts to it: a sugar, a phosphate, and a base. And so you should know the differences between DNA and RNA. The sugar in RNA is ribose, the sugar in DNA is deoxyribose. The bases in DNA are ATCG, in RNA it's AUCG. And then examples would be DNA, RNA, and ATP. ATP is a nucleotide, it's a monomer. DNA and RNA are both polymers. This one is single-stranded, DNA is double-stranded. And the elements are almost the same as in proteins. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. But there is not sulfur, instead there's phosphorus. And you can remember that because there's this phosphate group in the nucleotide. And that is the main gist of what you need to know for the macromolecules.